I'm Charles Hicks. I currently work at the University of Texas at Arlington as both an academic advisor and as a lecturer. Um, I guess how I got started in English, primarily I was a creative writing major when I was doing my undergraduate work. But I think like a lot of burgeoning philosophers and English students, I started reading quite a bit of existentialism. Was very interested in things like agency and bad faith and anguish and things like that. And I think inevitably that leads one to look at things like ideology and things like subject formation and subject development. And that really kind of led me into primarily feminist philosophy and quite a bit of kind of materialism and materialist philosophy as well. Feminism, I guess, on one level, I would define as kind of this strive for equality. And on a secondary level or supplementary level, I would think it's more an analysis of these kind of structural means of oppression and how categorization of femininity has worked against the female and the feminine, and ways in which to kind of pursue, agency, subject formation, same thing I was talking about earlier, and an analysis of the ways that identity is construed within kind of a political or socioeconomic framework. Um, in regards to what got me interested in feminist philosophy, specifically the maternal, is I took a class in grad school that dealt primarily with maternal feminism. So reading things like Kristeva and Ira Levin, these theorists that talk about the importance of the maternal body. And just looking at something from the standpoint of political agency, or agency as it relates to kind of subject formation, it's an amazingly powerful avenue of exploration, and things dealing with the body, things dealing with mind-body duality, and matters such as that. And I found it increasingly interesting, especially when you talk about things like ethics, Levinasian ethics. Quite a bit of that, if not all, starts with the maternal body as this paradigm of ethical formation and ethical activity. And I was always drawn to that because there's so many possibilities linked to it. I've always been drawn, to Gothic horror and science fiction for the ways they map the maternal body. And it's, speaking specifically about science fiction, science fiction's always trying to comment on our current reality by taking these futuristic means, whether it's futuristic technologies or kind of post-apocalyptic landscapes, and they're always or predominantly linked to the maternal body. And the maternal body specifically, and this goes for horror film as well, is always a monstrous body in a lot of ways, or it's a monstrous body, with the dichotomy of the beautiful stereotypical female body. And so I think it's, in regards to why I look at that, it's always just ripe, for analysis, because it looks at it really showcases and epitomizes the way in which we view the body in our own reality. The way we look at birth. Birth is either this unseen thing that's, off screen in a lot of ways, or it's this monstrous kind of schism. And it's always these two opposite ends of the spectrum. And I like to look at the reasons why maternity is characterized the way it is. It's always a good or a bad mother. There's very few in between. I like to look at the ways they interact with the child, and the ways in which we characterize monstrous maternity in a lot of ways. So the essay is a reevaluation of Deleuzian masochism, and Deleuzian masochism challenges the Freudian idea that it's this kind of submission to a paternal ego or a paternal authority. And what I've really tried to do primarily in this piece is challenge this idea that masochism, when it's overlaid with the feminine, is something that's at service to patriarchy. Because the way Deleuze formulates it, and the way I try to kind of rewrite what he's doing, is it's a subversion of paternal authority, and subversion of patriarchal hold of motherhood. And so when he formalizes this kind of masochism, it's always taking into account the various forms of maternity, the heteric mother, the Oedipal mother, these various forms. And when I'm looking at it as a tactical performance. So it's a performance by the mother that, in essence, desexualizes this kind of libidinal investment and then takes a role of authority. It's very much this kind of preventing, in a way, the abjection of the mother as something where the child, with the law of the father, the child must forego the mother in order to enter the symbolic. And in my research, what I argue is that once that occurs, once the child kind of enters into this futural horizon where they're no longer linked to the mother, they're kind of this reflection of paternal authority, that the mother's just cast aside. Whereas in a masochistic performance, and that word's garnered quite a bit of controversy because it has a negative connotation, but in the masochistic performance and the masochistic contract between the mother and the child, the mother forgoes this kind of abjection, and the mother is linked to the child. And therefore, and as we all know, the mother's identity is intricately linked to the child. The bad mother, the good mother, if you want to stereotype, is always judged according to the behavior of the child. And so by reworking and by having a dominant authoritative position with the child, the mother herself takes on a new authoritative identity. I think Rosemary Woodhouse is a perfect example of what we were talking about previously about the monstrous feminine. And what really drew me to the book and to the movie as well, although I focus more on the book, is the terrifying part is that she accepts the child, this demonic child, at the end. And that scene is so kind of grotesque. And I don't know what this says about me necessarily, but I saw that as this wonderfully liberating and ethical embrace of the other. And I think that characterizes maternity as, philosophers like Levinas have said, this kind of embrace of the other that characterizes motherhood. Maternal masochism in and of itself is that embrace. It's this embrace of the unknowability of the other. It's the embrace of the lack of control that comes with maternity, that you are foregoing a previously, what some would say a singular identity for a duality. It's giving up, a previously held role and a previously held identity for an identity that's a collective. And I think that's terrifying. But at the same time, I wanted to look at the liberating aspects of it as well. Masochism itself is a mimetic performance in kind of the same thread as Kristeva. It's a mimetic performance of the sacrifice of birth. And by miming that process, whereby the mother sacrifices a part of her identity and then mimes it, you take on a collective identity. And by a collective identity, you produce something new. And by producing something new, you are in a way subverting kind of patriarchal control. Because anytime, either through duality or either through multiplicity, that you can prevent or at least stave off thematization, then you start to work towards taking on new agency. I think heteronormativity, the assumption we have, and it's linked to the child when you talk to kind of maternal philosophy and things like that. Heteronormativity is that which the mother is in a lot of ways working against. The assumption that there are normative principles in which to judge the mother. Specifically, what I talk about in the essay is heteronormativity works through the child, and I use the figural image of the child. We are the maternal is subjected to this kind of idea of the future, and it's a heteronormative future. It's a future that medical technologies and juridical practices, they all work to kind of revitalize and redo and duplicate this kind of, for lack of a better way of saying it, white, heterosexual kind of future horizon. And so what the mother's actually working against is changing the landscape of that. And that's why I think it's so important for the mother to kind of work through the child. And I know that occasionally reads as if the mother's construing the child or constructing it in a different way, but that's what it is. And it's so that futural horizon where it doesn't accept the maternal identity for what it is, doesn't accept it for something or as an agent of its own making, it allows it to do so by working through the child. I think what initially drew me to maternal theory in general was that I thought it was so pervasive. But and this is nothing new. It's so much about the maternal being associated with the body or the passion, something we have to overcome, or it's an origin, it's something we must abject. And I think what I want to get away from, or at least what I want to draw from, is that maternal agency can be a number of things, and maternal agency can be a number of forms. There's historically been a lot of scholarship that talks about how the feminine must forego maternity, for a specific identity. And I think the passive nature or the passive undercurrent sometimes associated with maternity is something we can work towards changing, showing that it's an active tactical performance, that there's so much that goes into it beyond merely birth. A number of authors have written about the material practices, the material performance of maternity. And once you start looking at it as a performance, as an action, then you start really looking at the agency associated with it. And I guess one final point too that I want to look at is one thing that struck me when I was doing research for this is there's always the association of trying to kind of go back to this primordial past, whether it's the archaic maternal body that was before language, the pre-linguistic, the semiotic, and I think those are all necessary. But so much of it has to take into account the future and the way the child reflects upon the mother. And I think once we start taking those two in conjunction, then there's even more possibilities. I think I would advise being open to things that are strange and things that make you uncomfortable. And what I mean by that is I never thought, I fell in love with feminism and feminist philosophy, but I really didn't think that maternal theory or motherhood would be my area of focus. And it was something, and I come from, an extreme heteronormative background. And so embracing radical motherhood, as you mentioned, and embracing these different ideas, it makes you a more ethical and open person. And I think feminism in general and motherhood specifically are about openness and about taking on the strange and about acceptance. And at the core of it, when I read philosophers like Ira Levin and these people, when they talk about kind of radical otherness, I think that's how you achieve a type of transcendence, is getting beyond the confines of your own subjectivity and letting go. And that's what motherhood is. And I think, just to put this in practical terms, if we can lay out the framework for that and then put it into practice, you build a more ethical society. And I know that sounds cliched, but once you start realizing that the contours of your own self are malleable, that they're porous, and that when you accept somebody else in any walk of life, that it makes you you feed from it, and you, to use that word again, you infect them in the same way. And once we have this type of ethical contagion in a way, you build a much better society. So I guess my advice would be for feminists is ground everything you do in some type of ethics. Ground something that you really think is going to make a positive mark on society.